So we will start very soon, and feel free, yes, to switch off cameras if you don't want to be recorded, but feel free also to keep them if you want also to participate in this gathering. And feel free also, Thomas, to check your screen sharing before we start. We are also happy to welcome you all for the seminar. Hello, everyone. Hello, Katya. Hello, Roberto. Very nice to see you all.
Now,
Great.
probably you see
perfect.
the...
Yes, perfect. Very good. Yeah, and we're really actually kind of a very small pre-introduction, which I wanted to start before we start, is that today's special seminar in a sense, because it's almost like a cross-pollination seminar between different institutes, and Thomas is now in Chile. Right now we are in France, and we have been also already discussing some of the work which we were doing here at the Learning Blend Institute, and that's why I also wanted to invite Thomas and to know more what you're doing in different areas. So Thomas will present today just one of the directions of his report research, and about interdisciplinarity, which is very, very important, very interesting topic here. And floor is yours. Feel free to present yourself. I know that you're a professor in Chile, but maybe you could tell us more about you before we start. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending, for coming. Very nice audience. Amazing. Okay. Yeah, I introduced myself very briefly, and thank you, Liu, Bob, and Mark, for organizing this. It's really cool, as you say, that we can do some cross-pollination, cross-fertilization of ideas and of people to kind of start up a network. Yeah, my name is Tomas Veloz. My work is distributed among a few organizations. One of them is the Center Leo Apostel for Interdisciplinary Studies at the Free University of Brussels, which is a sort of pioneering center around interdisciplinarity. They started in the late 80s, let's say, to reflect and organize conferences and publish books and study the future of interdisciplinarity. At that time, it was the globalization. You know, people were talking about the globalization, the coming of communications, internet, and they started discussing this concept that comes from Leo Apostel, who is a philosopher, of worldview. What a worldview is. Can we make some sort of scientific take on it, or at least a formal philosophical take on what a worldview is? And if we assume that there are many worldviews that are going to clash in the next decades, back in the 80s, how can we prepare for that? That was more or less the intention of the Center Leo Apostel. Then it developed in research in cognitive science, cybernetics. Many people came along, and we are now studying, for example, the origins of goal-directedness, funded by the Templeton Foundation, among other lines of research. So it's a broad thing. It will be a talk on its own. Second institution is the Foundation for Interdisciplinary Development of Science, Technology, and Arts in Santiago, which is an institution I've founded together with someone that might join later, Daniela Flores, and other people, Gabriel here as well. He works in the foundation. And we run projects and try to create a sort of interdisciplinary hub in Chile that connects with all the institutions that exist in Europe. And additionally, I'm a professor at the Technological Metropolitan University in Santiago de Chile, the mathematics department. And also I'm hired there to foster interdisciplinary modeling research and collaborations with foreign institutions. So it's a sort of internationalization strategy of the university. So I play this role of doing research and at the same time kind of network with different groups. And along this path of my background, also I think it's kind of relevant to mention, my background comes from physics first, then I did mathematics, and then I moved to computer science towards AI. And then I did a PhD in interdisciplinary studies, but I focused on cognitive science in the end, in the modeling, mathematical modeling of irrational thinking, basically, irrational conceptualization or decision making as well. And this path that I made was very kind of jumping from one discipline to another. I did a lot of research in mathematical biology as well. And on the way, I exchanged with psychologists, with anthropologists. So I happen to have a very kind of multidisciplinary, I will say not inter yet, but multidisciplinary pathway. So I visited many disciplines along the way and moved a little bit into philosophy as well. So this led, and being part of the Centre Le Apostel, a very important factor, led me to sort of have a feeling of interdisciplinarity, very, very grounded into practice and collaboration. So at some point a few years ago, I was teaching philosophy and on epistemology, and came up with this idea of understanding that interdisciplinarity doesn't fit well in our traditional understanding of what knowledge is, because it's too encompassing. And that's what I will try to explain now in this talk. I will try to introduce some ideas around this, which is an emerging research program that I would like to share with you and invite to collaborate. Okay, so this is the context. The context is a little bit trying to push you to feel kind of touched. So I hope you don't take it bad. But there is a comic here, a famous joke that the definition of the product in a company, depending on the office you go, you knock the door on, you will have a completely different understanding of what the product is. So, for example, in the case of a yogurt, depending on the finance, for example, says a cash cow, the operation says is 50,000 cases per month, and it's a 10% share. So you can look at the ways in which the concept, the product, is conceptualized completely differently, depending on the office or the department you work on. So the research and development or the consumer, everybody will think differently about the product. So the question is, what is the product? Can we speak about something? And this goes back, obviously, to the foundations of knowledge. So what are we talking about? When we say this, what this is? It's not so simple. It depends on who is looking at it and on all the background knowledge on it. So, and I come back to this joke that says, remember, when you are dead, you do not know you are dead. It is only painful for others. And it says, the joke says, the same applies when you are stupid, because you don't know you are kind of stupid. It's only painful for others. But I will not say stupid because it's too simplistic to think of this way. I think instead of stupid, we should say unaware of complementary perspectives, unaware of the thoughts of others that realize of things that you don't realize. And everybody is into this game. Like I believe that we all try to believe that we are not.
Ist dir das recht?
Oh,
Ist doch nicht schlimm, ne? Weil ich habe gerade erst den Link bekommen.
Ja, ist recht.
That sounds like Christian Gendreco. Yeah. Yeah. Hey. Okay. So yeah, that's a colleague. I could recognize his voice. So that's the it's a joke, of course. I'm trying to push this thinking. So the idea is to say, okay, we are not necessarily aware of most of what can be thought about the things we are thinking about. We should become aware we are not able, or we are generally not thinking about most of what can be thought about something. So it's a sort of call to humbleness. And then there is a psychological research on this, on how aware are we on what we think we know. And there is something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So in a summary, they say, people often believe they act with adequate, if not excellent expertise, when instead they misstep out of misunderstanding and miscalculation that they fail to recognize as such. They might think that they are doing just fine, instead doing anything but. So we normally believe we are right and we are not. That's the main. And I put this example on 3 levels. Protesters trying to protest against environmental change. Of course, I agree with protests and actions and so on, but many people might believe that they are doing the right thing and maybe they are polluting instead. You know, you can pollute by like protesting against pollution, you might be polluting as well. So we must be aware of that effect. Or these solutions like putting a green fence to make people think that they are fighting against climate change, and it's just like hiding a chimney that is polluting anyways. Or the typical understanding, or this is a criticism. This is not, nothing of this in this slide here is fully true. It's just a view. So the European Union, many people claim that they put this mask on saying we are ready for climate action, but then when it takes an action at home, then they don't do it. Of course, they might, you know, they explode other countries or other territories, and that because there are no regulations there, there is no climate action to be done there. And so probably you know what I mean. So there is a lot of cynicism in the end with respect to this idea of we are doing right. And the Dunning-Kruger effect, just to clarify here, it's basically a plot when you have on the x-axis how much you actually know, how much you really know about something, and then on the y-axis you have how much you think you know, how much someone thinks he or she knows about it. And the funny thing about the Dunning-Kruger effect is that when people know little about something, this is proven experimentally for many fields like medicine or language or sports in general. We can think of, for example, when we try to learn a language, we learn maybe 10, 20 words, and we have the feeling that we know already about the language. But then later on, when we start really speaking about speaking this language, we realize, oh yeah, actually, I don't know that much. Or when I try, for example, myself, I did some yoga at some point, and then after 2 months, I thought, oh, I have improved so much. I think I'm starting to get this thing. But then after 1 year, I realized that I was just like doing the first step of an infinite ladder. So, and this is the Dunning-Kruger effect, that we increase a lot our confidence when we learn just a little about something. And then it comes the learning of realizing that we don't know really about what we are previously thinking we know a lot. So there is a sort of path of learning, which is a little bit painful when the curve goes down, because you realize that the more you learn, the least you know, and that's when wisdom maybe comes in at the end, when you start to calibrate. Actually, I don't know that much. I know about this, I don't know about that. That calibration is really wisdom. But this Dunning-Kruger effect is very pervasive in knowledge in general. It has been proven, as I said, nearly in all disciplines. And my question here, that the challenge here, the motivation for this talk, is that maybe we are facing a Dunning-Kruger effect at the civilizatory level. So we think that we as a race, as human race, as sort of society, Western society, we got this thing, we got the world. We know how things work because we have AI, because we have cars, because we can send rockets to the moon. But in the end, we might just be at the beginning of understanding, or actually at the overconfidence level of what really is to be a society in a planet. So that's more or less the context, and then the agenda of the seminar. I will talk a little bit. I will go very quickly around this, because yeah, it's better to keep time for discussing. So this is more or less the agenda: the disciplinary structures, the wicked problems and interdisciplinarity, how interdisciplinarity goes in the academia, and then the small epistemological exercise for widening our perspective of what is interdisciplinary knowledge. So there is a lot of disciplinarity and institutionalization of it. It is a sort of feedback process. If we look at the history of how knowledge is transferred from one generation to the next, we started with techniques in the Egyptians, and then the Greeks created the idea of academies, and they separated knowledge already into, for example, rhetorics, music, geometry, and ethics. They created these big fields that every educated person should know. And then the Romans expanded into law and medicine and give a lot of importance to that. The Islamic, on the other side, had a similar approach to it, having literature, alchemy, and algebra as main elements or main fields to explore. And then in the medieval times, this developed again into some trivium or quadrivium, depending on where you're standing. And the idea was always to form the elite, to create an elite. In the beginning, even earlier times, it was techniques. Some techniques were needed for the society to function. Then in the medieval times, education and disciplinarization was meant to keep an elite functional, to have people that know, that can do politics, that can sustain the power structure of knowledge. So it's a lot about power structures. And then in the modern times, we have this traditional disciplinary division that it just evolved from the quadrivium or the trivium. And thanks to the industrial, well, first the scientific revolution and then the industrial revolution, that sort of clarify that areas must be separated into different fields because of administration purposes. You need to have a head for something. You need to have people working in one place and not in another. So then we have to create departments to keep people studying chemistry and not, for example, music. These two things must be separated, but in principle, the separation is mainly due to logistic purposes, not really because of the field itself requires a separation. It's more a logistic decision and a power structure decision. You need to have one big boss into something that can take decisions and make plans and decide what goes and what doesn't go, and so on. So there is a lot of I want to just bring in the idea that disciplines, in the way we know them today, they are the consequence of many aspects that are not related to just the idea of a discipline, like power structure, like logistics, like organization, like keeping an institution running, support social and anthropological processes even. So if this is not clear, maybe we can discuss it later, but this is the point of this slide. And now we can find the traditional disciplinary classification into formal, natural, social sciences, humanities, professions, and then there are many other sub-classifications. And just to go quickly over how disciplines are generally structured, we go to the sciences. I will, because sciences is quite well organized. I mean, there has been attempts to quite well organize it. And phenomenology scale is one of the best, let's say, arguments to say we can organize science, because there are phenomenological scales. Mathematics gives like the abstract or metaphysical, let's say, understanding of the world, abstract and symbolic reasoning, and it's an underlying layer of all explanations in science. And then physics goes to the most fundamental constituents of reality, if we stand on realism, or fundamental constituents of what can be observed, if we don't want to stand very much on realism, but at least we accept observation as a possibility. And then from physics, we got that chemistry is sort of emergent, comes out, where we already have matter and their constituents. So we've got chemical interactions and energy and all the game of chemistry. From chemistry, we got biology. From biology, we got psychology, maybe some layers in between. I'm just skipping those. And then from psychology, we got sociology. So we can see a sort of reductionist and expansionist overlaps and in between scientific disciplines. And this was a hierarchical idea of phenomenology scale that was proposed a long time ago. It's not the most actual way to look at it, the most updated way, but this was still, I will say that still this is sort of mainstream in the academia. People still think in this way, and it makes sense because there is sense in this, but there are many intersections missing in this picture. So the intersection, for example, between physics and biology, not all the physics, not all the interactions between physics and biology are mediated by chemistry. There are actual effects of, for example, electromagnetic fields directly into the neurons that do not happen because of a purely chemical aspect. It is just physics straight into the metabolism or the functioning of a cell. Same with, for example, psychology and law, or mathematics and psychology, or physics and sociology. We can. There are certain. Well, you know that there are many cross-fertilizations between different areas in the last century. So I give for granted that you know this. If not, we can also deepen into this. But the point is that there are not just interesting intersections that do not exist in this plot, in this graph. Do you see my mouse, actually? Can you see my mouse? Yeah. Okay. So there are intersections. So this doesn't go really in a sort of two-dimensional Venn diagram description. This is a very simplistic version of how disciplines really interact with each other. And even worse, what about wicked problems like sustainability and poverty? So these are problems that do not belong to physics, do not belong to chemistry, biology, psychology, sociology, belong to all of them all together. So there are phenomena that cross the whole range of possible disciplines created by this, as I told you, anthropological evolution of the power structures of knowledge that created these disciplines. So that was because the problems studied in the past were, okay, how can we study optics, for example? The phenomenon of optics creates an optics department, but then optics is involved in measuring something like, I don't know, climate, for example, can be related to climate, but chemistry is also related to climate. And then climate change, which is a problem today, that does not fit in any of the departments, but in all of them have something to say. Same with sustainability, same with poverty, same with global health. And then, well, we can keep going, well, with what's the name of this, like food production, like the logistics or politics, or like governance, urban planning. There are millions or lots of disciplines or lots of phenomenologies today that we know that don't belong to any of these departments. And that's what it's actually called wicked problems. They're called wicked, not because they are wicked, it's because they look wicked from the perspective of disciplinary organization we have today. So then I will go, for example, just to make clear the point that wicked problems are not disciplinary, but systemic. So how to disciplinize sustainability? From the knowledge structure we have today, we must start from fragments or perspectives that each discipline gives. And actually, there is something new, which you probably all know, is systemic thinking or complex systems representations or analysis. The ability or skill to perform problem solving in complex systems. So we got the world, we want it to be sustainable, but then we had, for example, these elements in place: industry, cities, and then economies. So these are like the symbolization of this, and they all interact with each other. But the problem is that their interactions are not necessarily just one-to-one. In the context of one happening, the interaction between the other two can change. So these interactions are actually many-to-many. Everything is interacting with everything, but in contextual ways. It's not as simple as just drawing lines between things and say, okay, this influences this in this way, independent of anything else. Nothing is independent of anything. Everything is, in principle, of course, we can make approximations, but in principle, everything can be interacting or being part, influencing the interaction of anything else with anything else. So it's kind of complicated. And also we have other human factor, well-being, biodiversity, And the question is in sustainability is how can we sort of integrate all these perspectives and having an encompassing view that can balance the different perspectives to even define what something is sustainable. So that's the problem. And then I think it becomes very clear that this is a very complex system that requires lots of perspectives to be integrated. So back to the sustainable goals, for example, if I just put some of the sustainable development goals and try to match them. If you look at this in detail, I'm trying to match a little bit some of them to what disciplines they could be more aligned to. But this is impossible to do in 2 dimensions. I mean, like no poverty, where do you put this? No poverty. To which department will no poverty belong? Does it belong to ethics, sexuality, psychology, economics, political science? Where? Linguistics, religion? So that there is no solution for this. So the sustainable development goals, if we think in these terms, is just a question that doesn't fit the disciplinary structure we have in universities. So we should create a no poverty faculty, let's say, where the idea of disciplines is already gone. So that's with disciplines. And now back to technology. We now have super amazing advanced technologies for mechanization, diagnosis, monitoring. We got control theory, which is super advanced. We got AI. Now we have GPT and all these things that are coming. And we don't see really a plan, or we don't see, at least myself, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm too pessimistic, but I do not see that we are really solving the problems. I see every new technology I see coming out, I just see dangers to create more inequality, for example. I don't see that this is kind of like pointing to the utopic world. It looks more like it's going more to the dystopic world. So why if we have so much technology, if we have so much data and all this, we are just like amplifying the problems? Why are we still having war and hunger if we already develop everything that is needed to control our control nature? So why is that? There is something there that we are not getting yet, and that's why I was talking about the Dunning-Kruger effect, because there must be something that we are not seeing that is preventing us from solving these wicked problems effectively. Okay, so just to leave that there. Now I move to how interdisciplinarity is understood in the academia. So it's defined disciplinary or interdisciplinarity, multidisciplinarity. There are many concepts. So the point is here that the phenomenology of interdisciplinarity, so trying to understand what interdisciplinarity is, brought to understand many other things about disciplines. So when we say we combine 2 or more academic disciplines into one activity, okay, define combine. That's completely unclear. The crucial aspect, this is mostly I'm super critical about this sort of definitions, because they leave under the carpet lots of important things, and also do not really clarify much. It's just a very vague idea. Combination of 2 or more academic disciplines, where combination is not defined, neither activity. So thinking across boundaries, we don't know what is thinking first, and we don't know what are boundaries neither. Like, these are all philosophical conundrums that nobody really know for sure. And also, it's an organizational unit that crosses traditional boundaries between academic disciplines or schools of thought, and new needs and professions emerge. So this is more like institutional form of understanding interdisciplinarity. There are more than 40 years of debates in the academia, lots of articles, a lot of research, and traditions already established. So it's actually not easy to penetrate the interdisciplinary people, because you got to read a lot of books just to speak in the language they speak about interdisciplinarity. And if you don't know those holy cows or big authors or specific terms, then they won't listen to you. So it's already a self-isolated domain in a way. I mean, I'm not criticizing, because I understand that there is a lot of work there and it's valuable, it's valid, but it's not reaching out in a sort of let's say in a sort of connecting way. It's not really connecting to the world. It sounds really cool. Public policy is taking a lot of this, but most universities, I think I will talk about this, are doing steps without really knowing what they are doing. It's just because it sounds good, because it's politically correct. Talk about interdisciplinarity. Our mission is to become an interdisciplinary and international institution. What that means? What's the meaning of that? What do you want? How can you measure that? Just because you have people from all countries or people from all disciplines meeting up, what is the product? Where does it go? I'm being super critical just taking this role. It's not that I'm against this. I like this and I work on this. So sounds like there is a question, or it was my Discord.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah. If there is a question, you can interrupt. I mean, just go for it. And also one big problem of this at the theoretical level is that the inter-trans border is vague. So to this, this is more or less the traditional understanding of this. So we have disciplinary, we have different balls, different domains. Multidisciplinary is when there are different disciplines, but they kind of, connect, interact with each other. So this is when the problem is a little bit more complicated. Then interdisciplinary is when the disciplines fusion or merge, and then transdisciplinarity is when there is something completely emergent out of the interaction of the disciplines, and we cannot see the borders between disciplines. So all what I just said sounds really cool, but it doesn't mean anything when you try to really put it in formal terms. What is the border between inter and trans? That's not very clear. So there are two types of transdisciplinarity. I will talk about transdisciplinarity or inter, because as I said, there are no solid criteria to discern when something ends being inter and begins becoming transdisciplinary. So I will just, because the papers speak about transdisciplinarity in this sense, I will use this term. There is something called theoretical transdisciplinarity, whose focus is to connect or communicate disciplines. There are a lot of interesting philosophical research on what is to connect levels of reality. So there is one guy, I think it's called Nicolescu, that has done like really interesting research on this. I will skip this part because of time, but this connects even to quantum, to the ontology of quantum systems. So the transdisciplinarity, it's at the theoretical level has gone very far, trying to discern and explain what can be two disciplines, what can be two ways of knowing the world, and how can this be communicated. And actually, I want to make a little element here, which is what connects to quantum, is that these experts have proposed the idea of the logic of the included middle to speak about transdisciplinarity. The logic of the included middle. We always know from logic the excluded middle, that to be or not to be, right? You can be or you can not be, but you cannot simultaneously be and not be. That's called the law of the excluded middle. There is no middle way between being and not being, right? So in formal logical formula would be P and not P is always false. It's a contradiction. Actually, P and not P is a logical contradiction because it's always false. And if you assume it true, then you can prove anything else. That's the logic. But the logic of the included middle says P and not P exists. And that's related to quantum systems, because the cat can be dead and alive. It's the same. It's assuming that the cat is alive and is not alive. So the superposition states, in a way, encapsulate the idea of the included middle. And that's why they don't exist in our physical reality. They are superposition states in a quantum potential, in whatever. I'm not sure if I'm speaking, let's say, Martian language here. I'm sorry, but some of you might know a bit about quantum theory. So it's just to make the connection between the idea of knowledge creating new levels of at the superposition state like situation is the way in which theoretical understanding of transdisciplinarity has gone to. So I won't want to deepen anymore on this, but it's interesting also to see the relation between subject and object and the hidden third, which is what I was saying here. So the pre-modernity, modernity, the relation between subject and post-modernity. So the object is kind of dependent of the subject, and transdisciplinarity is putting the subject and the object interacting, creating a larger whole. So this is more or less in philosophical terms. What is transdisciplinarity? So it's a let's say, philosophical-like area, and there is a lot of research, very beautiful articles, a lot of interesting discussions. But there are certain challenges, because theoretically provides an advanced view, but it's very hard to connect this with the real needs. So you can go and reflect about transdisciplinarity, but how can you make that practical or approachable to people? So we can, there is something interesting about this, is that in transdisciplinarity, we cannot, in wicked problems, we cannot repeat observations all the time. Many of the things we do are just affecting the system. So the scientific method, which is observe, repeat, and make an induction, might not necessarily be the best approach. There is intersubjectivity, as I was saying, perspectives, and also a very important aspect of transdisciplinarity here in the theoretical side is that is kind of super westernized discussion, which kind of speaks about transdisciplinarity as if it will be an external element of reality that is not related to the power games of the academia, which anyways is encapsulated into that. We are researchers hired by academic institutions talking and speaking about this. We have to include that aspect in the game, in the discussion. So these are challenges that the theoretical transdisciplinarity must face. And I will make a little digression here to complex systems to understand this. So maybe I think maybe later I will mention more about complex systems. The transdisciplinarity type 2 is the other way, and it's another community. It's mostly different people who focus in implementing solutions, in solving decision making. They give this list of things. Knowledge is produced in the context. It has its own distinct characteristics. We have many viewpoints. The structures evolved, are not hierarchical. Knowledge is socially relevant. We have procedures, and there are lots of methodologies. So I just show this a picture of what you can see in an article of, for example, this is sustainable phosphorus management in a transdisciplinary methodology. So they create a dynamic of stages, and we got to do this, we have to put these stakeholders, discuss here, come up with a conclusion, this and that. And they create sort of, let's say, management methodologies to put people to working together. And it's quite efficient, it's quite beautiful, but there are also many challenges here. Society is not prepared for it. So there is something called the no problem, so that people don't see the problem of not taking care of it. So why should we care about this if we are doing fine just like this? Like, again, back to power structures. There is cultural conservatism. For example, in the case of sustainable production of copper in Chile, we have been, it's a little example, we have been selling copper in a very raw form for decades and decades, and everything is ready for our country to refine the copper and produce second, third product. Hello?
Sorry.
Yeah, so everything is ready for doing second and third and fourth, let's say, layer products, but we are not doing it. We keep selling just raw material because that doesn't sound like a problem to the people that have to make the decisions. Also, project leaders are typically not credited to be trustworthy because there is not yet an established firms or established methodologies to work on this. So this is all like trying. Universities put little projects and there is little money on it, but maybe bigger firms are now kind of understanding this better. This has to be updated a little bit. As I said before, the theoretical challenges are pervasive also to the practical challenges. So shared language, silo thinking, systems boundaries, all these things are complications that make transdisciplinarity to really happen in reality. Personal fluctuations are disastrous in a transdisciplinary problem because you create your own language around the project. So if someone leaves and someone new comes in, that new person requires a whole new introduction. And also transdisciplinary solutions normally are planned to have long-term results and larger initial investments, but investors normally want short-term results and short initial investments. But sustainable solutions normally can only be seen in the long run. So, and also nobody knows when the decision is made because of transdisciplinarity. So if you think of the problem, how to really implement transdisciplinary methodology, you face all these issues. And that's back to the question. The question is, are we experiencing a Dunning-Kruger effect regarding our view of our own problems as a society? Do we think we can solve problems really with the tools we have? Are we really able to? So that's the challenge and the question. So all this is kind of proposing like a call for systemic thinking, for complex systems analysis, and as I mentioned before, like different disciplines interacting, but all this has to be developed. So I will take a little now step on my personal career, because as I said, I worked with people in many disciplines: biochemistry, epidemiology, ecology, in the list there, like lots of different disciplines. And many of us, not just maybe just me, but many of peers are feeling a sort of incompleteness and disagreement with the current power structures on how the academia is going forward, how knowledge is applied. There's publish or perish or stuff like that. Like we feel like really struggling with our own actions. How can they be effective with the world to solve or to mitigate world problems? How can we connect? How can we learn? How can we apply our energy and get something better out of it? And many people feel this disagreement, and we get in CLEA or in the foundation that I run, we get people often coming and say, oh, okay, this looks really cool. We are looking for something like this. We don't find something like this in the rest of the academia or in the rest, or I work in a company that nobody listens to these things. So there are a bulk of people kind of expecting something out of this, something like this to be part of. And I just mentioned a little like activities that I have tried in my career in very different domains, like activism, entrepreneurship, arts, or consulting in private sector and so on. So my personal take after this path is that we need to go a little bit to the bottom of epistemology to understand really what is interdisciplinarity. We need to go a little bit deeper to the problem of knowing. And this is what I will do, a very simple exercise just to finish. Go back to the theory of knowledge. There are three three types of knowledge. There is one division into three types of knowledge. It's very simple. It's very basic. Theoretical, practical, and experiential knowledge. Theoretical knowledge is the typical example is what we learn at the university or in school. Is just learning what's in the book. The book has the knowledge, and we can measure it with a test, and we can transfer it because I can give you the book and then you get the knowledge. You just read the book and then you get the knowledge. That's it. Then the knowledge is encapsulated in symbols, and it can be physically preserved and passed from one place to the other. Libraries are the example that were thought to be repositories of knowledge, but there is way more knowledge than that. For example, the practical knowledge, dancing, salsa, or riding the bike being the typical example, you can measure it because you can see if someone dances well or not easily. You can test, okay, do you think you say you dance salsa? Okay, I put the song, da, 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 and then you dance. If you can dance, then you know. If you cannot dance, then you don't know. But I cannot transfer this knowledge just like that. I cannot give you the book. This is the way you dance salsa. You need to involve your body into it and make practice. That's why it's called practical and not theoretical. Experiential knowledge is even worse. It's the experience of something, and I define a little bit like the outcome of multiple and complex interactions, like being a best friend of someone. Can you really measure that two people are best friends? Like, I see these two people, show me that you are best friends. There is no like ultimate test for it, as in the case of dancing salsa or as in the case of solving a physics problem. So, and this or knowing someone deeply, loving someone, like this is only comes through experience, cannot be really ultimately measured. Maybe yes, maybe there can be methodologies, of course, but it's not as simple as the other two. And it also cannot be transferred directly. I cannot transfer you the experience of being best friend of someone. This is something that only can be get through the experience. Practical knowledge has one particular feature in between theoretical and experiential, which is you can make a protocol. For example, if you want to learn martial arts, you go every couple of days a week and you get the sensei. That person will teach you the technique, will correct you, and you will, with practice, you will learn. But for experiential knowledge, becoming best friends, there is no protocol. You cannot establish a protocol to become the best friend of someone or to know deeply someone. There is no protocol, it's just the happening. You need to let time and the nature takes care of it, or we don't know how. So these are three completely different types of knowledge. And measuring is fundamental for scientificization. When we can measure something, we can make it more scientific. And transferring is fundamental for teaching. So these are two aspects very important for how knowledge is passed on in society. When we know how to transfer knowledge, we can teach it. When we know how to measure something, we can make it scientific. And if we make it scientific, we can make it precise, which is, and maybe controllable, we can make technologies out of it. If not, we cannot. So it's very important to make this distinction because we're trying to step out a little bit and then come back to problems like sustainability and stuff like that. We need to know that these elements are in place when we talk about sustainability. And then there is another distinction, which is not so traditional in theory of knowledge, but still is kind of modern. And yeah, there are some authors that talk about this. The types of knowledge, and there's a W. There are three types again: passive, enactive, and creative. So passive knowledge is the knowledge you gather from reality without making any alteration in it. Any alteration you can at least observe. When I look at the stars and the position of the moon, I'm not going to change the moon. And the moon is not going to change its position or whatever I want to measure about it because I'm doing such observation. So I can repeat the measurement as many times as I want, and it's not going to be contextual to what I want to see. The fact that I want to see it is not going to make any change on what I'm seeing. Differently is the case of tasting a cookie. For example, you can, well, there are different examples with the cookie here, but let's say that we have many cookies. We can taste all cookies we want. So there is not just one cookie. But if I'm hungry, if I really want to eat the cookie, if I'm being forced to eat the cookie, what I will think or what I will observe, my understanding of the taste of the cookie will be dependent on the context where I am. If my context is being forced to taste the cookie, then the flavor will not be pleasant. For example, if I'm really hungry and I found this cookie, I feel lucky, I eat it, I will enjoy it. So the knowledge of what is the flavor, what is the taste of the cookie will depend on my context. There might be better examples than this but to explain this, but you can repeat, you can eat as many cookies as you want, but it is contextual. And then there is another type, which is creative, writing a poem. That poem you wrote, you cannot repeat that experience. It just happened once. At some point, you wrote this piece and it came to you. There is not going to be a second time you do that very same thing. It's a piece, it's something that comes to you, it's something that is created in the moment, it's completely contextual, and it cannot be repeated. So repetition is fundamental for intersubjectivity, which is related to science as well, that we can repeat the experience, the observation, and context is fundamental for diversity. If everything would be non-contextual, then we can assume there is just one reality, like one truth. But we know that this is not the case anymore. I mean, modern, let's say, worldviews do not think that the world is non-contextual, and actually from quantum physics, we also know that the world, the reality is fundamentally contextual. So, so then we come back to interpret all these aspects, and we can see that there are different classes of knowledge. So knowledge that is theoretical and passive, theoretical, active. Yes, you?
Yes, just to be mindful about the time. So I know that we can talk also about the question. So just let us know when.
Yeah, I'm finishing here.
Great.
Yeah. So there are this list of knowledge forms. And then the thing is that if we separate knowledge in this way, we have that these different types of knowledge are emphasized by different types of disciplines. And this is something that hasn't been really very much noticed, that art, for example, is all about in this area, experiential, active, creative. We associate that with artists. I think I have something like, I have something like this. Typically, the examples of theory and theory to experience, we can find actually in all disciplines. In physics, we tend to believe that it's more theoretical and it's more passive, or maybe theoretical active. But actually, to become a real physicist, you need to cross over all these forms of knowledge. You develop all of them, but some of them are really part of the plan, and some others are not. They just happen. With music, actually, is the same. And the thing is that we can find this to relate disciplines, to understand that all of them mapped through such a distinction of knowledge forms. And we can see common grounds beyond our disciplinary limits. That's the point, at a deeper level in epistemology. And then I just take out this very simple example of social inequality. You can think that maybe in order to know the phenomenon of social inequality, you will have to cross over all these distinctions and identify what is the theoretical passive knowledge of social inequality. For example, databases of salary, and what discipline studies that, maybe sociology or geography. Then you can start thinking about, okay, what is the theoretical active? It's something that is more intersubjective, but still you can measure. And then sociologists and so on. You can keep going. And for example, there is this artists that can go and live for like a month or something in a very complicated place, because they want to immerse themselves into this reality and then come up with a piece. That's the other type of knowledge, the experiential active. So I see, I propose that we have wicked problems. We do not understand them properly because we don't see the blind spots in the knowledge that we need to gather in order to understand them. So, yeah. So that's I finished with this, with the more comprehensive approach to knowledge as a civilization. So the disciplines are a good distinction, but I think that now that we get this this understanding or these new ideas, we have to combine, I think, complex systems with a little bit of epistemology and try out at least a basic understanding of what interdisciplinarity is. So with this, I finish, and I'm sorry for taking too long. I know that one of the students of the systemic modeling group would like to share some slides at some point. So I hope we can make time for that as well. If not, maybe other occasion. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. And I think we will go for questions.